Hello and welcome to this Shiur on Hilchos Pesach, Tafshin Ein Tes, hosted kindly by anash.org. So we have a number of questions, and to start off with, why are we so careful about Pesach? So we know the word of the Arizal, that one who's careful about Pesach, who succeeds throughout Pesach to avoid even the slightest volume of comets, slightest amount of comets, will be protected from sin, from Avera, throughout the entire year. That's from the Arizal. In Halacha, just like we have by Avodah Zorah, there's no such thing as bitul, because some Avodah Zorah is such a severe Avera, and therefore we don't rely on bitul b'shishim. So similarly with comets, during Pesach, because it's such a strict issue of Chiyuv Koros, therefore even the slightest amount will not become bottled. There's no bitul b'shishim, whereas throughout the year bitul b'shishim would be applicable. So now, looking at the questions which were presented here, how much to clean, which rooms, where to scrub. So on the one hand, we have a story of a woman who comes before the Rebbe, and she says that she's finding Erev Pesach so difficult, and the children aren't helping, and the Rebbe says to her, Schmutz is nicht kein Chometz, und die Kinder sind nicht kein Korban Pesach. That dirt is not Chometz, and don't use your children as a sacrifice. That's on the one side. On the other side, we know the word of the Barditcheva, that Kashrak, which we have of the Tkiyas, the Tkiyah Shvarim Tru Tkiyah. So Kashrak stands for Kratzen, Scheiben, Reiben, Keren, how the tirches, the efforts which people invest before Pesach to make sure that the house is all so clean for Pesach. So there's a tremendous merit in that. So that we have to understand both sides of it. So we will try to make the rooms obviously clean. Where to scrub? You ask, where is it most important? Most important is where it's most likely that there would be a residue of chametz. I would think particularly things like door handles around the kitchen, where you may very likely have been in the middle of making a cake, and then you're now gone to open the door. So there will be likely a residue of chametz on those door handles. Similarly, the handles of the fridge, the freezer, and throughout the kitchen if you're using those doors over Pesach. So those places where there's a likelihood of a residue of chametz, that's the kind of places where you should be cleaning as well as possible, and if necessary to cover them over. Where do you have to be bodek chametz? So wherever it is likely, even to a small degree, likely that chametz may have been brought there during the year, so that's where bedikas chametz would have to take place. Certainly in a place like a dining room, kitchen, no question that bedikas chametz has to be done wherever chametz could be hiding, but also in places like bedrooms, if occasionally one does take some food to a bedroom. So that would also be a place where it's a mokem shemachnisin by chametz, and therefore bedikas chametz would have to be done there. If you move into a hotel room, or if you move into someone else's in a vacant room, which had been used previously for chametz, so then you'd have to do bedikas chametz before you use that room on Pesach. Similarly, in your workplace, if you have a warehouse and you have an option of closing down for Pesach and selling the whole place in mechiras chametz, and any place which is being sold for in mechiras chametz does not need to have bedika done there. So that's one option. But if you are, for whatever reason, have to be open over Chol HaMoed, so then that warehouse will have to be subjected to bedikas chametz, and to make sure that there's no chametz lying around in corners, etc. When you do bedikas chametz, you first have to sweep the floor, and so the bedikas chametz is not on the open floor. It's basically in the corners, in places where chametz could have arrived there without being so noticeable. Similarly, in the car, I mentioned this before, that in the car is a place where it's mochin shemachnisin bechomets for most of us, and you do need to do b'dikas chomets in the car. Don't use a candle, as you don't want to make your car into a korban Pesach, and so therefore you don't use a candle. Instead, you use what in America they call a flashlight. In England, we call it a torch. So that kind of thing, that's what you should do b'dikas chomets in the car, where both in the trunk, in England we call it the boot, or in the certainly in the cabin where the engine is. That you don't need to be b'dikas chomets. It's not a place where you leave chomets there. But I'm talking about under the seats, and if it's seats which can be lifted up, so you should lift up those seats and check that there's no chomets there. The pockets inside the car, the ashtray, whatever, all this. There's lots of little compartments in the car, especially with little children. You'd be surprised. One year, a couple of months after Pesach, I found a pretzel in one of my winter boots. Okay, let's go on about kashering. So we have the simplest type of stove to kasher would probably be the old gas stoves, or for that matter the old electric stoves, where you had a spiral kind of burner which you could turn on full. That would have been fairly straightforward. That would be called libun. Libun means you expose the metal to a very high temperature or heat, and that burns away any residue of chametz. What we have nowadays is a lot of these glass-topped stoves, and they are much harder, much more questionable as far as kashering goes. The way it works out in Ramah, in Shulchan Aruch, is that to kasher a stove you'd have to use libun, which would mean you'd have to use a blowtorch. That's not going to work on a glass stove, a glass top thing, so that's going to be quite a problem as far as kashering for Pesach. Now, coming to counters, I want to just explain a simple principle. There's no belia, there's no transmission of taste from one thing to another if there's no fluid in between. So if you've got two dry surfaces, one is chametz and the other one is an extra layer, no chametz is going to penetrate through from one to the other if there's no fluid in between. Therefore, if you have a chametz countertop in your kitchen, how did it become chametz? Well, possibly during the year you may have put down a chametz kugel or a chametz loaf of bread directly on the cake, hot cake directly on the surface. Okay, so your countertop is chametz. Now your countertop is now dry, it's clean, and then you put a thick board, which is how thick is it? I'm not going to go into in millimeters, but you're putting a board over it, and then you now have got there's no fluid in between. So even if the heat of a Pesach dicker food is going to penetrate through that cover to the chametz dicker countertop beneath, that still does not mean there's any transmission of taste lahalocha. And so if you have a thick cover over your countertop, there's no need to kasher the countertop. If you cover it with a durable, thick cover, then you do not need to kasher the countertops. When it comes to sinks, so there, if you are actually using the sink, so then, in other words, a lot of us are going to put in a rubber bowl, a plastic bowl rather, which has got a hole in it to be able to act as a insert in the sink. Then I'm not so concerned about the kashering of the sink itself, because it doesn't come into contact with anything else which you're going to use on Pesach. But let's say you do want to use the sink, so you'll want to kasher it with boiling hot water. Now the problem is that once the water is pouring out, it's not in the original keli, the kashering effect is a little bit weaker, and that's where we have the idea of even melubon, which means you want to reheat the hot water that should be on the level of boiling, even as it's out of the kettle. So what you typically do, you take a brick or and leave it on the stove. What I've done in the past, I've taken a wire hanger and wrapped it around, taken the wire hanger apart and then wrapped it around to be able to hold the thing, which in England we call them pliers, in America they call them perhaps a wrench, to be able to hold that hot brick. And then as I'm pouring the hot water from the kettle into, as I'm pouring the hot water from the kettle to kasher the sink, at the same time I'm reheating that water with the brick, so it's actually sizzling, it's bubbling as it's coming to contact with the surface to be kasher. So I do that around the sink, around the interior of the sink. Similarly, the bottom surface of the sink. I would also do so with the tap, with a faucet, and pour water, hot water, and at the same time that water as being poured would be reheated with the oven melubin. Separately, I'm concerned about the U-trap. Underneath the sink, there's usually a plastic or metal pipe, which is a U-shape, and there's going to be waste from previous uses. I don't want any of that to be finding its way up back into the sink during Pesach, so I want to destroy it being have any time, any edible taste. So we'll pour down on Erev Pesach. We'll pour down some kind of caustic soda or some kind of strong detergent, which would make any food residue inside the U-trap to make it quite inedible, and that would be reassuring us that even if something does come up, it's not going to be a problem of causing comets. Going on to the various minhagim about foods. So there is these minhagim are in Chabad, but they are, you can say, across the board of Hasidic minhagim. That, for example, fruit is only used by if it's peeled first. So then people find ways of how to peel tomatoes and tomatoes in American or etc. There's also the chumras of trying to avoid using manufactured foods. Now, I want to just say something very simple. This is not a perfect science, and if you ask me, I use from this particular manufacturer, I'm using their wine and their grape juice, so why don't I use their apple juice? My answer to you is, if I'd have to use the apple juice and I wouldn't be able to make it myself, then I would have to use it also. But I can manage to make my own apple juice, my own orange juice. I don't know how to make my own wine, and therefore I'm buying my wine and I'm making my own apple juice. It's not perfect. There's no. I'm managing where I have to buy manufactured products. I will use those where I can manage making those foods at home alone without having to buy manufactured stuff. I will go for that option. And that's the way I was brought up, and that's generally the Hasidic minhag. This is also got to do with the eating out. There's mentioned Hayom Yom that really Pesach is a time to be home. Pesach is Selaves Oves Selabois. Pesach is really a time for to be Pesach should be at home. However, sometimes you go to visit someone. So this is the word which it says in the Hayom Yom, when you come to visit, someone comes to visit you. So normally you'd invite your guest, machabrocha, eat something. When you come to my house, you make them eat something. On Pesach, the host will not pressure their visitor to eat some food, although they will put food before them. So there's this expression of nishmishenzach on Pesach, and that is out of recognition that Pesach if you could say, is a free-for-all for chumras. It's this whichever chumrah. Some people have this chumrah, some people have that chumrah, and therefore, instead of offending people by saying I don't want to eat, I don't want to rely on your thing, so there is this idea of nishmishenzach, to respect that each person is entitled to have their family chumras. Let's go on to eating matzah. And so eating matzah is is the only mitzvah which we have today, which is a mitzvah in our Torah of eating. At the time of the Beis Hamikdash, Kohanim would have a mitzvah of eating truma, and we would be able to say, if we ate part of a korban, we'd say al achilas hazevach. But in today, the only mitzvah in our Torah of eating is eating matzah. And then we have midrabanon nowadays. More is midrabanon. The reason why it's midrabanon, although it's written in the Torah, that is because the morer, as it's written in the Torah, is together with the Korban Pesach. Unfortunately, at this moment, we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, and therefore we cannot do a Korban Pesach, and therefore the morer nowadays is midrabanon. As a rule, when we're talking about a mitzvah min haTorah, we take a stricter view. When we're talking about a mitzvah which is midrabanon, we can take a more lenient view. Generally, when we talk about a mitzvah of eating, we're talking about a kazayis, which is the size of an olive. Now, I don't know which type of olive we're talking about. Obviously, bigger than the ones we get in the pickle jars. But so think about, if you want to think about how big a kazayis is, think about a fluid ounce in American, or think about a box of matches. That's approximately the size of a kazayis. That's quite hard to work out when you're talking about lettuce or when you're talking about matzah. So I'm going to show you a picture, and I know that a lot of you may have been reading books which talk about measuring the matzah in weight. The thing is that matzah, which is grain, which is wheat, is lighter, it's less dense than water, and therefore a kazayis of matzah will weigh less than a kazayis of water. So whereas a kazayis of water would weigh about 27 grams, a kazayis of matzah would be quite a bit less. But I'm going to show you a picture which someone has kindly worked this out for us. And here, according to Reb Chaim Noah, that would be if you are eating one kazayis. So there, you can see that's the average thickness shmura matzah. Of course, sometimes you have thinner matzahs, and sometimes you have thicker matzahs, but we're talking about the average thickness of a matzah, and that's how much if you are having just the one kazayis. Now, why are you having only one kazayis? Now let's explain. When we have at the Seder night, we have 3 matzahs, and there's a dilemma whether the mitzvah of matzah is from the top matzah or from the middle matzah. And to cover both bases, we eat a kazayis from the top and from the middle matzah. That is all true for those folks around the table who have their own own Seder plate. For those who don't have their own Seder plate, so then we're going to prepare a kazayis of matzah. So that is, you're going to have one kazayis of matzah. So again, that is the size which you want for a kazayis matzah. Now those who do have a kaira, so it's enough to have 2 smaller kazayisim, because between the 2 you're inevitably going to have well over 1 bigger kazayis. So for those who they have their own kaira, they should have 2 smaller kazayisim, one from the top matzah, one from the middle matzah. Now I want to point out another point, that like every Friday night and every Shabbos day, when Tati makes hamotzi, he cuts the challah and gives everyone around the table a piece of the challah. So everyone wants to have from the Lechem Mishnah. So Pesach night is also Yom Tov. This year, the first night is going to be Shabbos also. So everyone wants to have a piece of the Lechem Mishnah. And again, this dilemma is whether the Lechem Mishnah is from the top matzah, from the middle matzah. So before I go to wash, I call over Moishela, and I tell Moishela, I don't have Moishela, never mind. I call over Moishela and I say, I'm going to give you a job. I'm going to give you, after I break my matzah, I'm going to give you 2 pieces, one for my top matzah and one for my middle matzah. And you will then take those two pieces and go around the table to all the ladies, etc., who don't have their own kaira, and you'll give them a piece from Tati's top matzah and a little piece from Tati's middle matzah. Besides that, they will have the full kazayis, as we've illustrated before, and that is for the first kazayis matzah, as we have said, which is a mitzvah min haTorah. It's a mitzvah min haTorah for men and for women. And so if you are able to, of course, if you have particular problems with digestion, etc., so then you'd ask a shayla. But generally that would be the advised amount. How much would that be? About 40% of a matzah? Approximately, okay. Then we come to the mitzvah of morer, and so here you have a picture of a lettuce leaf, and approximately, well, it'll just about fit the size of a regular page. In England we call them A4, American you call it perhaps quarto or whatever. So that's approximately the size of a kazayis of lettuce. You can see here 2 leaves. Don't worry about it. We're talking about only 1 leaf of this size. And that's how much you'd need. Now, if you're going to also put in horseradish, grated horseradish, which is alminic, so then that will allow you to have less lettuce because you're making up your kazayis with the horseradish. And to work out a kazayis of horseradish is actually very simple. As we said, you think about a matchbox, you think about a fluid ounce, think about the small glasses which be used for mashke, which those glasses have for some reason been growing bigger and bigger over the last few years. But that is, those small glasses of 1 fluid ounce, that's the amount which would be a kazayis. My Shvera Lashon, Rabbi Nachman Sudak, he would relate how the Rebbe would take from the grated morer, and he would take a fistful of the grated morer, and then he would squeeze it and shake off the surplus juice onto the floor, and he would have actually quite a generous amount of morer. That's besides the lettuce which he had. And also he had, the Rebbe was noyig to take that lump of grated morer and wrap it in the lettuce leaf. So the lettuce leaf became, you would only see the lettuce leaf, you wouldn't see the morer, it would be hidden inside. Let me just tell you something else very interesting, which I also heard from my Shver, that when the Rebbe would break the matzah, as we all do, the Vayachatz, and then during the Seder you're meant to have because the broken matzah has to be visible, and that's the lechem oini, lechem she'oinin elot vorim, that the matzah should be visible at the recital of the Haggadah of Magid, apart from the times when we lift the cup of wine, and by whatever other points, but otherwise the matzah, the middle matzah particularly, should be visible. The Rebbe was knowing all 3 matzahs were visible, but the halacha is at least the middle matzah, the broken matzah, should be visible. But the broken matzah has got a whole side to it also. It's got a broken side and got a whole side. And the Rebbe would rotate the matzah in the way that the whole side should be visible and the broken side should be inside the cover. Then we go on to the koirech. So we go back to koirech, and koirech is a mitzvah d'Rabbanon, and therefore you can go back down to the smaller amount of matzah for koirech. So that smaller amount, don't worry about the other one which is hiding the background. Just the front matzah, that's about a quarter or less of a shmura matzah. That would be enough for koirech, and you'd have together with it you'd have your lettuce and your horseradish, etc., and that's enough for koirech. And similarly for afikomen. Again, once you've eaten your first kazayas, you've fulfilled the mitzvah in Torah. For afikomen, it's enough to have a smaller kazayas, as we described over here. Although there is a hidur to have 2 kazesim of matzah for afikomen, because you're having for korban Pesach, 1 kazayis for korban Pesach, and another kazayis is for the matzah which was eaten with the korban Pesach. So therefore there is a minig of having 2 kazesim, hidur to have 2 kazesim. If you at that stage you can manage to have 2 kazesim, fine. But again, by having smaller kazesim, it makes all of these mitzvahs so much more manageable. Then there is a concept called Kadai Achilles pras. Imagine if you have a matzo and you nibble that matzo over an hour and a half. That's not that you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. There has to be a certain window, with a certain time frame, within which the matzah is eaten, or the mitzvah food is eaten, to be considered that it was eaten in one session, so to speak. So that session is called Kadai Achilles pras. There are various opinions how long that session is. Some say from 2 minutes, 3 minutes, all the way up till 9 minutes. But approximately, let's say, try to have your kazayas matzah within, let's say, within about 4 minutes. That would be recommended. Quicker, but try to keep it within the 4 minutes. Now, a helpful point that this shiur of Kadai Achilles pras, the moment go is not from when you start putting it in your mouth. It takes some time when you put it in your mouth and you start breaking it down with your teeth and chewing it. It starts from when you start swallowing. From when you start swallowing until you've finished your kazayas, that is the Achilles pras, and you should try to do it in 4 minutes. If you can do it in shorter, it's even better. Similarly, we're talking about shiurim. Let's talk also about the arba kosos, and so it's better to use a smaller glass and drink the whole glass than to have a big glass and only drink part of it. On this cup which I have in front of me, so that's the amount of a revius. Just from that point where it has the Reb Chaim Noah's name written there in green, it's not very much. I must say that this cup which I have in here in front of me, the smaller see-through perspex cup, is less than a revius, but this is about 2/3 of a revius. So really, a revius is quite small, about 3 fluid ounces, and as I say, when you're buying your glasses for Pesach, better, but if you have a concern that you won't be able to manage large amounts of wine or grape juice, so better buy smaller glasses, and then people will be able to have roiv kois, or the whole kois, rather than having bigger glasses and then struggling to complete your amount. Now, I had actually an interesting shaila this afternoon about a woman who is suffering from diabetes, and will have a problem to have arba koshus of grape juice because it's too much sugar. What I suggested to her is actually there's a concept called chamar medina, and we know that for havdalah, etc., we sometimes will use a cup of tea. And I told her that for kiddush and for benching and for the last, she can use a cup of tea. But for magid, if she can manage, she'll have a glass of grape juice. And the reason why I differentiated, because a cup of tea is normally drunk warm, hot, and if she'd have a cup of tea poured from the beginning of magid, and by the end of magid, by then it'll be freezing cold. That's not really a chamar medina. It's not enjoyed in that way. So that was one option. But in any case, if a person does have a medical problem, medical challenge with various of the mitzvahs, in good time, ask your local Rav, who will give you the specific guidance. Just now, a few points about the Seder, and about the fact that this year the first Seder is on a Friday night. So generally the Seder runs as usual. Of course, at Kiddush, it's a Kiddush for Shabbos and a Kiddush for Yom Tov. The second night, remember that it's a Kiddush and a Havdalah. It's called the Seder of Yak Nehaz, which stands for Yayin, Kiddush, Neir, Havdalah, and Zman, the Peri Priagofen, then the main bracha of Kiddush, then the bracha on the candles, and then the bracha of Hamavdil, and then Shechionu. Thinking about that second night, Chabad minhag is that we do not raise our hands towards the Havdalah candle, throughout the year by Havdalah, we put our hands, our fingernails, and we open our palms, close etc. That is not done on when Yom Tov coincides with a Motzei Shabbos. We just look at the candles rather than putting our hands closer to the candles. Coming back to the first night, so there is an issue of not preparing on Shabbos a strong solution of salt water. The reason for that is it goes to the people who would prepare leather, so they would use a strong solution of salt water. So preparing a strong solution of salt water on Shabbos would be part of the melacha, connected with that melacha, so we would avoid that. So preferably you should prepare your salt water before Shabbos. If you didn't, then you just prepare a very small amount on just before the Seder. But let's throw in also about the lettuce. As we know, they have to be checked carefully for bugs. You wouldn't be allowed to, you're not allowed to kill bugs on Shabbos, or for that matter on Yom Tov. And therefore, by putting the lettuce in salt water or other materials in order to kill the bugs which are there, that mustn't be done on Shabbos, nor on Yom Tov for that matter. So make sure that's done. If that's the way you clean your lettuce, do that before. And pretty much that was what I wanted to share with you tonight. And I'd like to wish you all just one last word. And the Rebbe once said that he wishes a kosher and freilich and Pesach. And he says, if you worked so hard to make sure that it's going to be a kosher of Pesach, then you have every reason to have a freilich of Pesach. So I wish you all a kosher and a freilich of Pesach. V'nochal shom min hazvochim and hapsochim with Mashiach tzidkenu v'meheru v'yameinu mamish.